Welcome to the December Power Hour. This is Tessa coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm going to walk through tonight's layouts. I have two examples. These are one-page examples, but the premise of tonight's layout is that with a couple of strips of paper, a decorative punch, and then a leftover variety mat or a rectangle cut out of scraps, you can create a nice one-page or two-page layout to highlight the simplicity of scrapbooking. So tonight I am going to use Merry Little Christmas. I have dark green cardstock for my base. I have this present print to use as my white strips. I have some white shimmer I'm going to use with the Dazzle border punch, so I've decided to use down the side of the layout. And then I have some scraps left over. These are already pre-cut to 2.5 inches, so I'm going to work these into my layout. And then I have a couple of mats. So I'm going to show you how to turn this into a 2-page layout. We're going to start with a 12-inch trimmer. And we need two strips. If you're making a 2-page layout, you need 2 cuts of a 4.5 inch section. Now, if you're using up what you have in your stash, you can easily make this wider or narrower. And again, I already have some pre-cut. If you don't have anything pre-cut, you would need 2 strips that are 2.5 inches. For the variety mat, this one is 4.5 by 6.5, but this one I liked for the title is actually 4 by 6. So I am going to cut a 4.5 by 6.5 mat. So that I get a consistent look on each side. I need to punch 2 borders. This is easy with any style of border maker or border punch. If you use an edger style like I'm using, where the design stays on the edge of the paper, you'll have to trim it. I can always trim this a little bit narrower once I get my layout, but I don't need it very fat. I'm gonna just start with giving myself maybe a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch of the open space along here. Now we can start putting together our layouts. I am using my dark green evergreen as my base. I have my wide strips. I have my dazzle borders that will go on the outside edges. I have my 2-inch or the 2.5-inch strips. And then I have my 4.5 by 6.5 mats. If you're unsure about your photos at this point, you can wait to adhere the mats because you have a large space here to fill with photos, and the mat might work better horizontal. Over here I might decide I don't have room for the title. Maybe I just want the cardstock for the mat. If you want to adhere it, you can adhere it so you have 4.5 inches a space there for a photo mat. I'm going to go ahead and adhere. To give me that flexibility, I'm going to adhere it at 5.5 from the top right. I'm going to tuck my dazzle border underneath. I'm going to adhere my 2.5-inch strip. Maybe about 1.5 inches from the bottom. Again, this can be flexible depending on your layout. That gives me the option of being able to put that mat horizontal or vertical. Same on this side. I have room to put my mat horizontal or vertical depending on how I want to lay out my photos. And then the fun part when you're ready to accent. Lots of room in the corners for embellishments. Merry Little Christmas had a lot of tags too. I'm not one to embellish much before I actually get the photos down. Just kind of get the idea of what your options might be. I look forward to see what you make. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Meggan Jax, and I am here with my December 2020 Power Hour layout. So I could not find my original layouts I created for the December, one of our very first Power Hours. So I had to put this all together. I actually do it in the next segment you're going to watch, so you'll get to see this exact layout all come together. I'm really happy with how it turned out, so I cannot wait to show it to you. So let's get started. All right, to get started to make this layout, we're going to want to make sure that we have the directions. You can get those on the website. They are the December 2020 Power Hour. And we need 2 background pieces, which I selected papers from the Earthy Home collection. And so I've got this kind of nice ivory and cream background. The opposite side is those palm fronds, and we'll be using this as a background. I wanted something neutral here that will let my photos kind of pop out. It's very fairly tonal. It doesn't have a lot of contrast in the design, so some interest without being dominant. Then I need a piece of paper that I'm actually going to make the top and bottom angled borders with. And it's going to actually, the opposite side of it will become these triangle pieces that you see on the opposite sides. So I need a paper that had two different sides to it. And when you look at the sides, they're different. So I've selected this scallop, green scallop paper. The opposite side is kind of that brown tonal paper. I am planning to make this be my top and bottom borders, this pattern, and the opposite side will form those triangle pieces. So when I come down here to this paper, this is the paper I'm going to follow as the cut guide. So you'll need those 3 pieces of paper. I do have some border elements. I punched with the mirrored scallop border maker cartridge. I also went ahead and cut 3 or 4 small strips of just accent paper. This was a wood grain paper that I went ahead. They're slightly less than 1/4 of an inch, which fits nicely between the mirrored scallops. You can see here you have a kind of that open blank area. I punched it in some, I think this was rich brown cardstock. Hot fudge would work as well. And then I adhered those strips of paper on the other side. So I have 4 of those borders. You will want 4 border elements that go with your layout. So rather than having you watch me punch all those, I did those ahead of time. So I'm going to set those to the side. You're also going to want to have a pencil, your cutting mat or a ruler, and then of course a 12-inch trimmer. So I'm going to set aside my background papers. I don't need those for the moment. I've got my directions. And the first thing we need to do is we're going to cut, so step number 1, it says cut pieces A and B. So they're to 3 inches wide. So I have my trimmer here, and I'm going to be cutting these pieces 3 inches wide. So the one thing you want to think about, and I do tell you here, if you have a pattern or a top and bottom pattern, like so this is a directional pattern. It's a little bit different as I rotate things. I want my scallops to be downward. The curve edge of my scallops to be downward. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is consider this the top of my paper. And per the direction, my pattern, the top, you can have you can view it as one. I want the pattern direction to be this side. So my top is going to be to the side. It can be to either side. So I'm going to go my top edge this direction. And I'm going to trim this at 3 inches. And I'm just using my straight blade. And I'll cut 2 of those at 3 inches. I'm going to go ahead and set this piece of paper to the side for the moment. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. So now I'm going to be moving on to step 2. And step 2, it does ask us to refer to the pieces as piece A and piece B. So for the purpose of this video, I am going to go ahead and mark these pieces. So I have piece A, I'm just going to put this in the middle, and piece B. So it says I need to place this on my cutting mat and measure 1 inch over from the top left. So I'm going to come here and line this up. 1 inch over from the top left is right here. And then I'm going to measure 2 inches from the top left. And I'm going to measure over 2 inches from the bottom left. All right, so that's piece A. And then I will use my trimmer to make that cut. So I'm cutting piece A. Line up here, line up there. I'm using the dash line on my trimmer to line up those angled marks or those pencil marks, and I will go ahead and cut. All right. Now with piece B, I'm going to look at step 3. Step 3, I'm going to go ahead and put B over here on my cutting mat. And I'm going to reverse my measurements. So I'm going to measure over 2 inches from the top left and 1 inch from the bottom. I'm following along my cut guide. You can see here that I will be measuring over a little bit further at the top left than the bottom left. So 2 inches from the top left, 1 inch from the bottom left. And I will cut those with my trimmer. All right. So those are my angled cut pieces, my top and bottom borders. I'm going to set those to the side. Now I'm going to go back here to step 4. It tells me to cut pieces C and D down to size. So C and D are both 5 by 4 inches. So in the cut guide I show you, we're going to make 3. The piece is already 6 inches wide, and each of these horizontal pieces is 4 inches wide. So I'll go ahead and cut these over to 4 inches wide. I'm going to make 3 pieces that are 4 inches wide. One of the pieces is scrap. Now what I need to do with 2 of those 4 by 6s is I need to actually turn them into 5-inch to cut them down to 5 inches wide. So I'll cut both of these to 5 inches wide. These pieces are scrap. These 1-inch pieces are scrap. Now, the one thing I want you to do is when we're looking at steps 5 and 6, so we take my pieces here. We're going to imagine these as pieces. We'll go C and D. So you have pieces C and piece D. Now, step 5. I'm going to go ahead, I'm working with piece C, so I'm going to set piece D aside, grab my trimmer, and it tells me to cut diagonally, cutting from the upper right to the lower left. Piece C, I cut from the upper right to the lower left. So I'm going to put this on my cutting mat, my 12-inch trimmer, using those cut lines, those dash cut lines on the gray trimming mat, and cut from upper right to lower left. Set those aside. Now, piece D, I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to cut from the upper left to the lower right. Upper left to lower right. All right, so there we go. We've already got step 7 done, or the first part of step 7. So now it's time for assembly. Assembly for this layout is really easy. All we're going to do here is we're going to put our background paper in place, kind of get it how we want it. Now you actually have the ability to kind of play around with your papers. The narrow or the wider strips go to the middle. And you'll see when you have a piece, like here's one piece. So we have a top border and a bottom border. And I actually want my scallops to go the other way. I forgot I wanted my scallops dipping downward. Here we go. I'll get this right. You have to move your pieces around a little bit to get it figured out, but you will figure it out. So there you can see how those start to take shape. So there's kind of the beginning of it. Now, I always like to do a dry fit, and that's what I'm doing here, largely because we can still flip these pieces over. If we were to flip them over, they just swap sides. So now we have these angled pieces, these rectangles, and they are going to get tucked in here. So you may actually need to put these down first. You have a little bit of leeway of how deep you want to put them. You can tuck them all the way to the bottom and leave a big gap here, which is going to give you, might give you a little bit more of a feeling of space to put your photos in. Or if you want to see more of the pattern, you can have them come in even closer. I might have them on this sample go ahead and come in a little bit closer, have a narrower gap here. So I'll get my cutting mat out so I can make sure that I put those down evenly. And then what you'll do here is the borders will get layered on slightly to that angle. And that's where it really starts to take shape, where you can see that angle. Those borders really give that accent of that angle. And then I have the recommended. The layout suggestion that I give you is using some 4x6s. You can adjust your borders as needed. You can also trim down your mats, tucking them in nice and close. Cluster those photos. If you have a larger variety mat, like one of those 4.5 by 6.5 inch mats, that can really do a nice job accenting this. So this is a 4x6. If you want to put a 4.5 by 6.5 inch mat there, you definitely could. I have some extra of this paper. And I think what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and cut a 4.5 by 6.5 inch mat and put it on there. A little more accent to bring those colors in. So let me just do that really fast. I'm going to double check that I have 6.5 inch wide, and I have just over 6.5. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this down to 6.5. Turn this and cut it at 4.5 and 4.5. And those will give me those two larger mats that I can use in here. So it's not part of the instructions, but you'll see it does a nice job of carrying this brown, this tan color, the lighter color into the middle, and it'll frame those 4x6s. So where I have the hot fudge, or excuse me, the rich brown mats, the 4x6s, those could be left as mats. I could then trim down my actual photos that'll go on here to, just slightly a 1/4 inch under a standard 4x6. So that's probably what I would do. Of course, you have the generic background here to make any adjustments that you need to. So if we take a peek at this again as a background, and I need to still adhere everything, I'll do that off camera. And at the very end, you'll see that final layout. You have a blank slate here. Really, the goal with this particular design was just to give you this blank slate to work with. And then, of course, you can put your photos on here however you need to. If you need to overlap in some areas to, over the borders and whatnot, that's perfectly all right. Just make it your own, work with the pieces here, and, be sure if you do share it, we'd love to see you share it in our Facebook ideas group. The link, you'll find that down in the description. And don't forget, if you need those directions, the printable directions are in the web shop. It is the December 2020 Power Hour. Thanks so much for watching.